up YouTube? Capital G here, giving you guys a quick card discussion on what has become one of my favorite cards in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently. This is a card that I've been playing for about a couple of weeks now, and it has been absolutely spectacular. It doesn't really seem to matter what deck I'm actually facing off against. Every time I open with this card, I just feel so incredibly secure with my position, no matter what I'm versing. And it's really interesting because I know that there are some decks that largely consider it to be basically a staple, but I still feel like it's a card that is criminally underused and kind of underappreciated as a whole. So what card am I talking about? I'm talking about the Counter Trap Solemn Judgment in this video. You guys probably know what Solemn Judgment does. It's an OG card from the DM era, Metal Raiders 3rd Yu-Gi-Oh! Booster set ever, and it's been printed in basically every rarity known to man, even as a ghost rare, which I recently just picked up. It's a card that essentially gives you the power to stop just about everything, pay half of your life points, and you can negate any inherent summon, any spell card, or any trap card your opponent activates. And it's fantastic because it's one of the few cards that really does give you that power to stop everything in the game. One of the cool things about a card like Solemn Judgment is because it has the ability to stop so many cards that commonly see play in the meta that it just really kind of feels like it gets more powerful over time. Like, think about it like this: the more powerful cards that Konami releases, the more cards that can potentially be stopped by Solemn Judgment. Now, unfortunately, the card does not actually stop monster effects, so you can't stop something like a Psy-Frame Gear Gamma, and it also means that if your opponent is going to activate like a Spell Speed 4, that would be also something that you can't stop. Something like Super Polymerization, but as far as I know, that's the only it's really the only meta relevant like Spell Speed 4 card where even a counter trap can actually be used in response. However, I feel like Solemn Judgment is just so fantastic. Like, one of the things that is puts the card kind of in a league of its own is the fact that it's one of only a handful of cards right now in Yu-Gi-Oh! That sees common play that can actually deal with the normal summon. Like, you can deal with your opponent's turn at such a fundamental level that a lot of times when you disrupt that normal summon, your opponent's play is going to be completely fractured. Like, think about decks like Altergeist, Sky Striker, and Salamangreats. If you're able to just cut their legs off, essentially, if you're able to just cut them off at the normal summon with a Solemn Judgment, chances are all the advantage that your opponent's going to try to make, all of the board setting up that they want to do, or the comboing that they ideally want to do in their opening turn, almost none of it is going to happen. You think of those three decks in Sky Striker, Altergeist, and Salamangreats, their normal summon is generally what they need to start comboing out. If they don't have maybe the one extender in their entire deck that they play, for instance, Will of the Salamangreats, or for Sky Striker, it would be something like Hornet Drones, your opponent's not getting any of what they want to do in that turn. All of the spells that a Sky Striker player will recur, whether it be the spell from the graveyard with Kagari, the spell that they add during the end phase with Shizuku, none of that's going to happen. For Salamangreats, they can just normal summon something like a Ladybug, use Solemn Judgment, and hell, even if they normal summon Gazelle, Solemn Judgment that, and basically if they don't have Will, their combo is just not going to happen in that turn. So I think it's fantastic from the fact that it is one of the only cards that stops the normal summon, and since it does have the power to stop all spells and traps, I love the fact that it also gives you a nice way of playing defense, even when your opponent kind of throws out those annoying draw two spells. You guys know the ones I'm talking about, the ones that are generally kind of used to, get rid of your Ash Blossom, or at least I like to use Ash Blossom on those cards. If my opponent opens up with maybe a Pot of Extravagance, or if they open with a Sekka's Light, I am almost certainly going to use Ash Blossom on that card. The problem then becomes I might only have one or two more cards to play defense for the rest of the turn. Well, if you have Solemn Judgment, not only can you use the Ash Blossom on that card, you still have one of the most fantastic defensive cards in the game to deal with your opponent's card. Or if you're feeling really ballsy, you can even throw the Solemn Judgment at that card, and then you can still use Ash Blossom on something like a monster effect that Solemn Judgment would not actually be able to deal with. So I do like the fact that it does actually deal with some of those very hard to deal with kind of spell cards, the Desires, the Card of Demises, the Extravagances, the Sekka's Light or Lord Darkness type cards that can really draw your opponent a ton of cards and really get them almost a new hand. I also think that it's really good And this is why I love it in Salamangreats at fortifying a turn 1 board. So it's kind of been a long time in Yu-Gi-Oh! Since we've had a format where, you know, 2 of your top 5 meta decks both have like Infinity Barriers. And that's one of the biggest reasons why Salamangreats and Guru Control are so popular, is because, you know, they're not quite as susceptible to their boards being broken. Because, you know, when you've got an Infinity Barrier that can kind of stop anything your opponent throws at you that's not a summon, you feel pretty good about whatever you're going to face down. But think about if you happen to have your Infinity Barrier like card. If you have that Salamangreat Roar, or you have that Subterra Fiendus, and you have a Solemn Judgment, you're now basically countering 33% of your opponent's opening hand. And what if they have, you know, maybe a dead card or two? You can basically have those 2 defensive cards and stop anything that your opponent throws at you. It doesn't matter if it's a monster effect, if it's a spell, trap, normal summon, whatever. As long as it's not super polymerization, you're going to be able to stop it between those 2 cards. And since Salamangreats and Guru Control can essentially get to those cards turn 1 at will, if you happen to open with the Solemn Judgment, you're just going to feel incredibly solid about your position. So that's one of the reasons I love it. Is I feel like if you're playing those decks, you see your Infinity Barrier, you see Solemn, you're looking at your opponent and saying, come at me, bro. It doesn't matter what you throw at me, it's not getting through. And think about this, Solemn Judgment is not only fantastic and remarkably good in game 1, it's one of the few cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That actually gets better in games 2 and 3 when people start busting out the side deck cards to answer whatever it is that your deck wants to do, especially if you are playing what a lot of people refer to as a trap deck. This can be something like Altergeist or Paleo, Guru Control, True Draco, effectively just kind of a deck that uses a lot of defensive cards as its primary source of defending itself. You know that people are going to side in, for the most part, some of the Power 5 against you. And if you don't know what the Power 5 is, I've talked about this before. These are just cards that are effective against these trap dot decks. This can be things like Denko Sekka, Twin Twister, Evenly Match, Dino Wrestler, Pankatrops, or even something like Red Reboots. And these cards are designed for the most part to not really attack your monsters, but to attack your traps themselves, and basically get rid of the cards that are slowing your opponent down, so your opponent can go full throttle and basically they can just run all over you and body you. And the thing about these cards is, the reason you see these same 5 cards sided against basically every trap deck is because there's no one blanket card that answers all of them. A lot of the cards that can stop the spells and traps don't actually stop the summon of something like a Denko Sekka or a Dino Wrestler Pankatrops, and vice versa. However, Solemn Judgment is the be-all end-all. It is the one card that has the power to stop all 5 of those cards. And even beyond that, if you were playing a deck like, you know, Sky Striker or Salamangreat, and let's just say your opponent didn't actually open up with one of those counter cards, you still have the ability to just stop any other main deck card that they're using that is part of their core engine. So not only does this card counter anything your opponent has sided in to counter you, as long as it's not like, you know, a hand trap, but it also has the benefit of being able to just naturally stop their core cards, which I think kind of makes this card insane from a versatility standpoint. Not really sure that there are many cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That can say, I can beat your side deck cards and your main deck cards all wrapped into one package. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about before I wrap this video up is obviously the most divisive part of Solemn Judgment, and that is the incredibly high activation cost of the card. It is something that has really swayed players away from this card. In fact, Solemn Judgment did not see a lot of play really at all during the DM era. Even during GX, it was really only used in like CO Burn. People really didn't start playing this in a lot of meta decks until Teledad during 5Ds, where people finally acknowledge, like, man, this card stops everything: the opponent's normal summon, their spells, their trap cards, even any synchro summon, etc., etc. Solemn Judgment has an incredibly high cost, especially when you compare it to the other Solemn Judgment that just have static cost of, like, you know, 2,000 life points for Solemn Warning, 1,500 for Solemn Strike. Solemn Judgment can a lot of times come at the cost of 4,000 life points. And when you look around and you see cards like Boros War Dragon, you think, man, if my opponent drops that post Solemn Judgment, I might lose the duel, but you have to look at it from the other side. You got to look at Solemn Judgment in the context that it technically can always be a live card, no matter what your life points are, unlike other cards like, some of the other Solemns, or even other cards like some of the pot cards, where if you don't have a certain amount of cards in your deck or your extra deck, etc., you can't resolve them. Solemn Judgment will never actually have that problem. You only need one life point to win in Yu-Gi-Oh! And even if you only have one life point, you can still technically activate Solemn Judgment. So I look at this card and I think of a card that's just going to be live at every single stage of the game, and no matter what, I know I'm always going to be able to get a 1-for-1 out of it and probably take away one of my opponent's most important actions and or cards during that turn. I kind of feel like that is incredibly invaluable, even if I do have to use it early and pay 4,000 life points. And also, the fact is, if you use it at the right time, a lot of time those Boral Sword plays won't actually end up happening, because you'll put your opponent so far back that getting to Boral Sword Dragon just might not be an option. Also, I guess last thing that I forgot to talk about was the fact that even though the card, if you read it, wouldn't kind of lead you to believe it, but Solemn Judgment can actually stop a Pendulum Summon of multiple monsters, which could become a lot more relevant in the upcoming months, especially when we get the new Endymion support, because that will be another tier 1 kind of deck that, does use the Pendulum Summon, not as much as Pendulum Magicians, but if they do Pendulum Summon 3-4 monsters at a time, Solemn Judgment can just absolutely cut them down to shreds, and you might just end up winning the duel. So I feel like this card is good against basically everything in the meta. I feel like it can be used in a multitude of decks. I feel like it is incredibly underused, even though there are decks like Guru Control and decks like Altergeist that do main deck it. I don't understand why true Draco players don't consider it a staple, but I don't know, it's just one of the mysteries of Yu-Gi-Oh! Anyways, whatever you guys thought of the video or think of Solemn Judgment, leave that in the comment section below. Also, if you guys enjoy these type of discussion videos, leave that in the comment section below so that I know to continue making them. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.